Elden Ring features some of the most stunning visuals ever seen in a game. Each area of the map provides a unique atmosphere of the landscape and the sky, and it would really translate well if we could edit our photos to look something like that. I'm going to show you how to recreate the different areas of the world of Elden Ring in Lightroom into your photography. This video will cover turning your photos into the Limgrave area of Elden Ring, but in future episodes of the series we're going to cover each of the other areas in the Elden Ring world, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss those future episodes coming soon. Let's take a look at the Limgrave area to see kind of what feeling we're going to be going for. Limgrave is lit well by the air tree, but it's still cloudy, so you're going to want a photo with both sun and clouds to match the Limgrave vibe. The Limgrave sky is one of the most complex there is in the game because there's so many different colors and so many different things going on. That's why having a lot of contrast in your clouds is a good thing when you're trying to find a photo to convert into the Limgrave style. If we take a look at this sample image of Limgrave that we're going to try to mimic with our edit, we're going to go through a few of the higher level changes that we're going to want to incorporate using the sliders in Lightroom so that our photo kind of gets into that Limgrave feel. First of all, we'll notice that Limgrave has really soft blacks, like there's no real deep shadows, like really black shadows anywhere in the scene. We also can see the sky is yellow, green, and orange hues, and our foreground is not really that much so. It's almost got a little magenta hue to it and a lot of gray going on. So we're going to try to match that using masking, changing our sky colors to be a little bit different than our landscape color so that we can appropriately capture the feel. This is the photo that I've chosen to copy into the Limgrave style, and obviously this is already after it's done and after I've applied my edits. So I'm going to talk through the edits that I've made and why I made them, and I'm going to restart from a fresh photo so that we can walk through it together. But basically we're going to try to get to about here. I want to talk about the photo I chose first because it's going to be an important part of how well your photo is going to match up into the Limgrave vibe. Now obviously we have a lot of clouds, okay, but we also have some source of light. In the game, it's the air tree, but for us, it's obviously going to be the sun. So we're going to want a cloudy sky, but with sun. It's going to be pretty difficult if you're trying to take a sunny beach, cloudless sky into a Limgrave vibe. Like, it's just not the same vibe. And even though we can apply the same preset or apply the same color corrections, it's just not going to look right. You know what I mean? So we kind of have to have the scene already set for us. And luckily I have this photo that I took perfect for Limgrave, right? We have the light source right off the screen, so we can imagine that it's the air tree, and then we have some dark clouds surrounding it. We have a kind of dark landscape in front of us that we can change the colors and alternate the colors a little bit. Now let me quickly show you what this looked like before I applied any edits. Obviously there's no yellow, green, or orange color. It's basically monotone. So we are able to apply this preset to get us into the full Limgrave feeling. I'm going to walk through each of the edits that I've made so that you can kind of follow along. You can create a preset for yourself if you want using the exact same slider settings. But keep in mind that if we vary the photo, we're going to have a little bit different sliders to kind of make it match up properly. But yeah, you can take this and use it as a preset if you want. Let's go ahead and get started from a blank shot. Here's the photo we're just going to start with from scratch, and I'm going to go through it with you guys, trying to convert this photo into a Limgrave feeling. Now, what I'm actually going to do here is go through all the basic edits first, and then I'm going to jump back to my pre-edited photo and talk you through the masks that I applied to the preset state. Okay, so we're going to go through the basic sliders, and I'm going to go in the order that I would probably go if I were to edit this from scratch. We're going to start with the tone curve here. Basically what we want to do is raise those blacks up pretty good, because if we look at our original Limgrave shot, we don't have a lot of blacks in the photo, like a lot of deep blacks. We also don't have a lot of deep highlights either, so we want to bring the highlights down a lot, and we also want to bring the blacks up, but we're not really looking to introduce much contrast. Like, we're not trying to pull any blacks lower than they need to be. So really it's just the endpoints that we're adjusting here, trying to keep all the other points along the line as original. and then basically just ending up right here with this particular tone curve. So already we've brightened up our foreground quite a bit. We've we've started an adjustment on the sky, and then now we're going to be able to go back into our basic sliders to do a little bit of refinement. For my particular shot, temperature and tint are right where they need to be when it comes to these basic sliders. We're actually going to adjust the tint slider down in the calibration section in a little bit, but right now I just want to go through the lighting, the exposure, contrast, highlight, shadows, all those. I want to go through all of these right now just to start to get the lighting right and get the lighting started. The first one I want to adjust is highlights. We're going to bring the highlights way down to about like minus 80 something. So the reason is that it's going to, if we look at the sky, that's what we're really focusing on here, is we're going to see individual clouds. We don't want a bright whited out spot because you don't see that in any Limgrave scene. Like, you can always see individual clouds, and you might even just drop highlights all the way down to minus 100 in this particular photo because it is a bit overexposed up in the top left corner there. So we want to bring those clouds back in just a little bit, but I think like minus 90 is good for me here. Shadows are pretty good right where they are, and we're actually going to bring whites up just a little bit, which sounds kind of weird, but whites was one of, like, because I'm doing this a little bit out of order, whites ended up needing to be increased. So I'm just going to show you, like, get to my preset, and then we'll see that the whites actually needs to be increased here because we're dropping all the highlights down. And this is mostly kind of for the some of the foreground stuff. We do want to brighten that up just a tad. Blacks we're going to bring up just a little bit as well. I know we already did it in the tone curve section, but we're also just going to adjust that slider upwards. For presence now, we're going to go over to texture, pretty much leave it where it is. Clarity we're going to bump just a little bit. I do want to see a little bit more definition in the foreground, and it's going to match the Limgrave photo or the Limgrave scene really well if we just bump clarity just a bit. And we also need to bump dehaze quite a lot. Look at the sky when we move this dehaze bar. Like, we are getting that definition in the clouds, we're getting the contrast in the clouds. If we look at Limgrave, it's really dark clouds sometimes and it's really bright colorful clouds, and we need both to get the correct vibe. So we're going to bump up dehaze to about plus 45 here on this particular slider. Now exposure and contrast, turns out we don't need to change those. Using all of the tone curve and the individual sliders, I think we're going to be pretty good without actually adjusting the overall exposure of the photo. But if your particular photo starts off a little bit darker or less exposed or overexposed, we can just shift it all over with the exposure slider. It depends on your photo, of course. Vibrance and saturation as well are going to stay right where they are, but we are going to adjust the saturations of individual colors down in the next section, going down to the color mixer. Okay, so for saturation here, Limgrave is primarily yellow, orange, and green. So we're going to drop down the saturation of basically everything else and leave yellow, orange, and green right where they are. Maybe bump up the yellow a bit. So we're going to drop the reds, blues, purples, and magentas. And depending on your photo that you're starting with, if you have a lot of those in your photo, maybe you drop them all the way down. But I think right here is where we want it to be. We also want to bump up this yellow here quite a lot, just to get the sky, get some color in the sky, and we are going to modify that in a little bit, specifically using masking when it comes to the sky. But yeah, we want to raise that yellow to get the correct Limgrave color scheme. The hue doesn't really need to change in anything. Maybe bump these blues a bit towards the darker, the purple side, I guess. And then luminance doesn't need any type of change. Let's move on down to the color grading here. Okay, so color grading is it's a little bit of a trap when it comes to this this project. Okay, you might look at Limgrave and say, oh my gosh, everything's yellow green. Okay, yeah, the sky is really yellow green, but the ground, the landscape is not. So we don't want to apply just a large blanket yellow green color grade to the entire image because the foreground is not supposed to be that color, right? So we are going to just kind of apply slight color grades here, and then we're going to make a little bit more drastic changes via masking, where we do select sky or select only the everything but the sky, and that will help us get the right color scheme overall. So let's start off with the color grades here. We're going to start off with our shadows first. Our shadows are going to come up between the blue and green section, and I think that is kind of the It's the best feel that I could find to copy the Limgrave image. For our midtones, we're gonna come up like between yellow and orange. I would say probably right on the yellows is pretty good for the midtones. And then for the highlights, we're gonna come all the way over to the orange-red section, okay? So after quite a bit of experimentation, this is where I found the best combination of color grades to get the good Limgrave feel. Now, as you can see, this photo is very like yellow-green all across the board, which is what we were trying to avoid. That's fine, we're gonna be able to fix that with masking. We do need to apply a slight color grade across everything, but if we went like all out and applied a super yellow color grade here, like for the midtones, for example, getting rid of that in the foreground is just so difficult. So we just need a slight yellow to start off, and then we're gonna really emphasize it using masks in the sky going forward. We're once more going to lighten up the shadows a bit by dragging this slider here over to the right just a little bit, and then we're gonna take our blending option and move it to the left, and that is gonna take us from green down to like orange, like a little bit more yellow. So we're gonna slide this over to about -35. And balance, I guess it can slide to the right slightly. I think that kind of gets our colors a little bit better. I have no other edits before masking except for calibration. I don't have any like vignetting. I don't have any other kind of blurs or corrections that are needed. Those are a little bit more photo dependent, like individualized photos. So if your photo needs any of that, please feel free and go ahead and do that. But now we're gonna switch over to the calibration section. We're gonna start off with our tint, pulling it down towards the greens just a little bit. And I think that's just gonna get our, if we look at our sky, it's gonna get our clouds a little bit darker, which is kind of funny. But it kind of just, because it matches the color a little better to what we need, it's going to bring down the apparent color of the clouds there. We're also going to take our hues in the green section and pull it over to the left a little bit. Like -15 is pretty good. So it's not a huge change by adjusting this calibration, but it will turn out a little bit better in the end, I think. Yeah, and that wraps up the pre-masking portion. So this is basically the preset if you were going to apply one, and it gets us kind of close. Like, it's not so bad, but we do have a bit of work to do using masking to get the sky correct and get the foreground correct. Like, our colors are off, our foreground's too green, our sky is too bright, our sky is not, like, there's not enough orange and green and black in the sky, so we're going to be able to adjust that next using masks. Now, like I said, after we finish the preset version, we're going to skip back over to the original photo because I already have the masks set up and ready to go. So what I'm going to do, right now all the masks are turned off. I'm going to walk through my 6 masks and talk about exactly what I did in those masks, and then basically let you copy the same situation. Now, the masks are going to change a little bit different based on the photo, of course. So for mine, I'm selecting different things using different intersections. They might not be the same for yours, but I'm going to tell you the theory. It's going to be based on the sky, it's going to be based on the landscape, and it's going to be based on the light source in the photo, okay? So I have 6 masks here. I deleted a couple, that's why they go up to mask 9, but there's only 6 of them. So let's go through and turn them on one by one to get us where we need to go. We're going to start with this one here, which is mask 4. This is just a radial gradient with the center around the brightest part of the sky around my light source here. If your light source is completely off the image, then maybe you have a little bit different of a kind of selection. Maybe the center of your radial gradient is off the image. But yeah, this is where mine is set up. You can see kind of the center oval right on the brightest part. All this one did is bring shadows down by like all the way. We want to get those darker clouds in the image. If we look at the Limgrave sky, we have black clouds like among the brightest parts, which is really hard to replicate because it doesn't feel real, right? But that's what we're trying to emulate here. So we're gonna pull the shadows all the way down. We're gonna pull the highlights down too, and that is going to get rid of that whiteout space, and we want to really differentiate, get that contrast in the clouds here. And then we're gonna bring the temperature up a little bit to make it more orange. Besides that, did I make any color changes here? No, not in this particular mask. We did increase the dehaze by another 32. So for this, that's really gonna try to get the contrast in the clouds. Now we're gonna turn this mask on. Let's see what it does. Wonderful. Like, it may not seem like realistic, with your own eyes, but it looks like Limgrave now. Like, we have dark clouds in the brightest spots, which is weird. It's like off-putting, but that's what Limgrave looks like. We have black clouds among the brightest clouds. Okay, so that's what that mask does. I'm gonna turn it off, turn it back on again. We're looking good. Let's do the next sky mask. The next sky mask is kind of weird. I did a select sky, and then I did intersect with a select color range. What I was essentially trying to do was select all of this, like, everything outside the orange, you know, like not the brightest part, but the next level down of brightness. And this is the overlay here. So yeah, I kind of just, if we're editing the sky in layers of brightness, we're just moving outwards. For me, using a color range was a little bit better because it matched everything pretty well, but maybe a luminance range intersection is going to be better off for you. Let's turn this mask off, but take a look at what changes are made. So in this one, we just have a temperature increase. So right now, this is with the mask off, our sky is a little bit blue, okay? We want to shift that over to orange. We also brought the tint down towards the greens, okay? And then I also did a hue shift in this particular image. I needed to do a hue shift over to the oranges just a little bit, and we're gonna see how that turns out. This one is all about just getting the color of the sky correct. The only other change made in this mask is using this blue tone curve. I pulled the shadows up to blue a little bit, but the highlights down to orange. Now let's see what it looks like when we turn it on. There we go. Okay, so before it's blue, after we have that layer is kind of orange. All right, and yeah, there's not a whole lot of blue in the Limgrave sky. It's a lot of orange and green and yellow. So this kind of, we're slowly modifying all the colors to where we need them to be. Let's take a look at the next mask now, which is just one step further, okay? This one, if we take a look at the overlay of what I selected, it's just everything outside now. And how I did this one was select sky in, and then I subtracted a radial gradient. So remember our original radial gradient, which is just the bright spots? Now I did select sky, everything but that radial gradient, right? So that's where this mask comes from. In this mask, our changes made are, let's see, we have contrast all the way up. Contrast all the way up. We're trying to get those clouds in a dark color. We're trying to make this weird, right? The Limgrave sky is weird. That's what we're going for. Our highlights basically the same. Our shadows coming down. We're trying to get those black clouds where the, like, far from the light source. Everything away from the air tree is dark clouds. Shadows down, whites way down. Okay, remember how we moved the whites up overall in the image, like one of our very first edits? That's okay for the sky because the whites are coming way back down anyways. And then our blacks are gonna come up a little bit brighter. It kind of just pulled it all together by doing that. I did a little bit of a hue shift here. I don't know, this was an interesting edit. I never really used this tool, but I basically moved over to the greens a little bit. If we look at the Limgrave scene, our dark clouds have a little bit of a green hue. In our image before this mask, they were a little bit too yellow and orange. So that's where that hue shift came. And then there's nothing in the tone curves or any of these other edits here. So let's take a look at what that mask does. Let's turn it off really quick. And then we turn it on. Boom. It just makes our shit dark where the light is not. And yeah, this one's kind of optional, but I feel like I needed some real darkness in the sky. I needed some real contrast between that light and the darkest part. Yeah, and what looks kind of weird right now is this like mountain. In my own image, this mountain is avoiding all the masks. So that's what this next mask is. Basically just fixes that. I'm just going to show you and turn it on, and it kind of brings it closer to what the landscape looks like. So that's the next mask that I'll just briefly cover. It's specific to my image. I have a weird like foggy mountain thing in the way, so we're just bringing that back in. So the sky's pretty good right here, but the whole picture is looking a little bit dark. It's looking a little too dark for Limgrave. Okay, so we have two more masks to go. Let's take a look at this last sky mask. This is what it's covering, just a complete select sky mask here. And what I've done is bump the exposure up just a little, just overall. Across the board, we're bumping the exposure up, and that is going to kind of help fix our sky just looking a little bit too dark. Clarity is moving up to 18. Dehaze is coming down a little bit. We're just undoing a little bit of the more drastic changes that we made in individual places. And this is going to basically get our sky right to where we want it. Let's turn off that overlay. Boom. And that's where our sky is. This is before that mask, everything was really dark. This is after. And this is our final Limgrave sky. We have a nice gradient from light source to kind of outer clouds of basically luminance, right? We have our colors, yellow, orange, and green, pretty good. Now our only problem in this image is that the foreground is also yellow, orange, and green, when if we look at Limgrave, it should be grayish magenta with just a little bit of orange green in there too. So let's take a look at our final mask of the image, which is mask 5 here. There we go, and it's basically just select sky, select inverse. It's basically everything but the sky. This one has quite a few changes in it because we haven't really given the landscape any attention. We're dropping that exposure down a little bit, but we're bringing up the highlights big time, and that's going to get the scene right where it needs to be. We're also bumping up the contrast quite a bit, and our whites come up and our blacks come down. So we're just adding a lot of contrast to our foreground, and that's going to get our colors where we want. Our temperature coming way down to the cold, okay? Our scene is right now very orange, yellow, green. If we bring the temperature down, it's going to kind of undo that a lot. We're also bringing our tint way over to the magenta. So we're just getting rid of that yellow, orange, green in the foreground. Next, we're going to have saturation come down. Limgrave is quite a bit gray in the landscape, where our sky is the source of color. So we're going to drag our saturation down a little. And now we made some tone curve adjustments. We're just going to raise those blacks up a little bit. And now we go over to the blue tone curve, and we're going to bump up the blues in the shadows and bump down the blues towards the yellow everywhere else, or basically in the midtones here. And if we get rid of this overlay, let's take a look at the final result. There we go. It's very gray, a little bit of hint of magenta in there, and that's going to really match our Limgrave scene. We can see how we've changed the sky to be significantly different color than the foreground. If we line these photos up next to each other, we have a really solid Limgrave setup. Now, that's going to wrap it up for this Limgrave edit. Don't forget to subscribe, because up next is going to be Stormveil Castle, and we're just going to go through that one and go through how to create a preset for that. That one is going to be far less masking intensive. Limgrave is weird. It's got a significantly different sky color than the foreground color, and that kind of makes masking really important. But for Stormveil, everything's just blue, right? So that one's going to be a lot easier to create a preset for. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode where I cover that one. And with that, I'll catch you guys in the next one. We'll see you soon.